In today's show, we have WWDC dates, back in Steve Jobs' theatre, subscribing for a bigger iPhone camera bump, MagSafe iPad Pros, and 15-inch MacBooks, all but confirmed. But what will they be? So first story, WWDC begins on June the 6th, it seems. This is the leaked rumour. This has come via John Prosser. This is what he's hearing behind the scenes. And let's be honest, it makes sense. It's pretty much always at the beginning of June. It's normally the first or second week. Pretty safe bet, I would guess. And this is the more interesting part. It might well be Apple's first in-person event since the beginning of the pandemic. The last one was actually in September of 2019, if memory serves correctly, which is just a bonkers long time. That's way before this channel started. We have never covered an in-person event as it happens. I mean, we've looked back on the original iPhone event. We did that as one of our 10,000 subscriber things. But we've never actually covered an in-person event live, kind of as it happens. So this is interesting because obviously the events that we've had just recently have been pre-recorded, which means Apple gets a lot more control over what goes out. Things are never going to go wrong on stage when you've got your whole event pre-recorded, which kind of used to be a part of the fun when Steve was trying to show off the iPhone's speed of loading web pages, and there was
570 Wi-Fi base stations operating in this room. Okay? We can't deal with that. Would you like to see the demos or not? Okay.
So that's the sort of stuff that never happens when you're doing pre-recorded events. Be interesting to see if Apple can get some stuff to go wrong again. But what do you think? Is it important to get back to real-world events? Remember, WWDC is not just a conference that we get to watch. It's also a full week of workshops for the developers, so it does actually make quite a big difference to the people that are actually working at these things to be able to be there and actually have hands-on and time with the engineers that work on these software platforms. So I think it's a good thing, but I would guess that Apple is going to be doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that everyone is kept safe. Next up, subscription iPhones. You've probably seen the news swirling around at the end of last week. Apologies that we were a little bit quiet at the end of last week. There was a lot going on this side. Subscription iPhones, I'm not 100% sure how different this is going to be to the iPhone upgrade program. Perhaps they're just modifying that to become this subscription iPhone thing where you basically just pay a set amount per month and you get whatever the latest iPhone is, and they automatically upgrade you perhaps, but you'd still probably need to choose colours, all that sort of stuff. There's certainly interesting things there, and I know how much you guys hate subscriptions in general. I don't expect that buying your iPhone is going to go away. I'm pretty sure that you will still be able to buy it outright and own the device. Potentially moving to a subscription model, reduce some of those issues. Is this perhaps something that Apple is doing to avoid sideloading? Maybe if you have a subscription iPhone, you won't be able to sideload apps, because a lot of people's arguments are that, well, I own my device, why can't I do whatever I want with it? Maybe if you don't own that device, maybe Apple has a bit more control over what you can and can't do. That would be interesting. However, I think they already have some control on that sort of thing, because if you want to use iOS, then you're kind of agreeing to their terms and conditions in the first place. Let me know your thoughts on this. I don't know if this is going to be revolutionary, or if this is just going to be a bit of a flash in the pan, a bit of a damp squib. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But I would probably subscribe to the latest Mac so that I've got the option to upgrade it as soon as the new one's available. Would it be the most economical thing to do? Probably not, because buying a Mac outright and then being able to resell it, because the resale stays quite high, might work out a lot cheaper. We did a whole video on this. You can check that out just up here. The iPad Pro. We've also had rumours via Mark Gurman our MagSafe charging iPad Pros may well be released this fall. Now that definitely suggests we would be getting M2 later this year as well. I can't imagine that they're going to put out another M1 based iPad Pro when we already have an M1 based iPad Pro, and now we have M1 based iPad Airs too, and MacBook Airs and Mac Minis and iMacs and everything else with M1 inside it, with the basic M1. So are we going to get M2 by this fall? I blooming hope so. It seems like it's a bit overdue at this point, and I'm really hoping that because Apple will have done most of their redesigns at this point, that we will then get into our annual upgrade cycle. Perhaps that's all it was. Please tell me there's going to be an annual upgrade cycle, because it makes absolutely no sense that these devices would only be updated every 2 years when even with Intel we got them pretty much every year. And 15-inch MacBooks. Now, we've been hearing for quite some time that Apple is looking at MacBook Air in a 15-inch size, basically a non-Pro MacBook that is a bit larger, has a bit more screen real estate so that you've got more space to work with, but without the higher price tag of a Pro Mac, especially now they start at like $2,000. It looks like this is going to happen. Guoming Chi has been talking about this, and he's been talking about the fact that it may well have traditional LCD displays, not mini LED, will not have ProMotion. However, it will get about a 0.3 inch size bump for the 13-inch from 13.3 to 13.6. That to me sounds awfully like smaller bezels and a notch coming to it, I'll be honest with you. And then a 15-point-something inch as well, which is also going to be a much larger display. However, he also says it might not be branded as a MacBook Air anymore. So are we going back to that MacBook branding that we've talked about a lot of times, dropping the Air and the Air becoming a more premium kind of maybe mini LED based 13-inch device, and this is maybe a MacBook in 13 and 15? Who knows? Let me know down in the comments. It sounds more like a MacBook XR to me. So the iPhone XR obviously came out with the new style design. It had the notch, but it had an LCD screen, unlike everything else in the range at the time, which basically had OLED panels. I think the iPhone 11 might be the other exception to that. That also had LCD, but outside of that, pretty much all OLED, and that would kind of fit here if we were going to LCD with this one and mini LED on everything else. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on those stories down in the comments. We're going to get into your iCave answers now, but I just want to address this. It does look different. We've moved the top display back above this one to try and make it a bit more useful in day-to-day for me. We're going to decorate this back wall. Let me know what you would like up there. And the reason for all of this is just on top of my Mac Mini at the back there, which is now back on the desk, there is a Quizlabs hub on there, which has got some extra storage inside. We're doing a whole video on that. Stay tuned. First iCave Answers question comes from Marcin Kowalczyk. With M1 capable Linux distributions, I know at least of Asahi Linux, do you think it would technically be able to overclock the M1 Ultra in the Mac Studio? Not that I see much reason to do so, just curious if it's at all possible, since the M1 Ultra heatsink seems to have massive headroom for heat removal. You're right, the M1 Ultra's heatsink is probably capable of getting rid of a lot more heat than it does at the minute, but overclocking I don't think is something that you're going to see. I'm not sure how the Linux distro kind of works. You know, are they going straight in at the root level, or is it virtualized, or is it... I'm not quite sure how that's working, but what I would say is that this probably doesn't have like a traditional BIOS, because it's Apple Silicon, so I don't know where you would do this overclocking if you can. Anyone that knows a bit more about this, feel free to leave me some details in the comments, but for me, I don't think that's going to be something that even other operating systems will have access to. Sean P asks, iCave Answers, thanks Dave, appreciate the topic as you know. Can't help feeling that Apple will do one transitional machine for gaming with M1 chip, i.e. a higher end Apple TV-like device, before they do a $3,000 AR machine. Why? Because most will not be able to afford the $3,000 machine. I suspect that Apple will want to jump in soon. What do you think? So, as I've said in the past, I'm pretty confident that Apple isn't going to release something that is purely gaming. I don't think that makes any sense at all. I don't think that they will do an M1 based gaming system. I think it's more likely that the Mac itself will just become more capable of gaming in, along the lines of the way that the PC does. There were people in the comments section telling me how much cheaper a Wii U or a Switch or whatever else might be, an Xbox or a PlayStation are than Macs, and so why would people game on a Mac? But they've obviously never heard of PC gaming because they're quite expensive as well, but the point is they can do other stuff and they're not sold for a loss because of exclusive gaming. So it's a very different thing. I do think that it makes far more sense for Apple to just open up standards on the Mac so that you can use the Mac you already have to do gaming. I don't think they're going to do a standalone device. I don't think it's going to be a separate device that you use for gaming, but it would be really cool if we got an Apple branded controller, that sort of thing, that maybe gives some sort of exclusive control mechanisms that others don't have. What do you think? Thomas Rabenstein asks, iCave Answers, my Mac Studio is now on the way and will arrive shortly. I have one question. Since it takes a lot of effort to open the case and remove dust from the fan and cooler, I'm afraid that the ventilation system will become clogged over time. Is there a way to protect the inside of the Mac Studio from dust but still provide ventilation? maybe a filter. Any ideas on how to do this? I would definitely not put any filters over the front of it, because anything that you add to that will reduce airflow, and that will potentially make it hotter in the first place. Yes, it would slow down dust getting in there. However, what I would probably say is grab yourself a vacuum cleaner and just like stick that over the vents every couple of weeks. Just suck out whatever stuff is getting in there, and make sure that you're also not using it in a kitchen, because if you've got any grease on that dust, that's going to make it like a sticky, horrible mess, so you don't want to do that. So don't fry in your studio office. Don't do any deep frying. Not ideal. But in all honesty, these fans are not also spinning up that fast. They're fairly quiet, so I doubt there's going to be a huge amount. Having just moved my Mac Mini around, there was like a very thin kind of film of dust around the base, which is where it draws air in, and then it exhausts out the back. I don't think it's going to be a massive issue, and to be completely honest, with the way that Apple has started to release, or at least is planning to release, the teardown guides, I think there will be a fairly simple way to actually get into it. The only thing that is quite annoying is that you do have to kind of peel off that rubber ring on the bottom to access the screws. It's a bit annoying, but it does make it look cool on the bottom. Team Kinetics asks, iCave answers, Mark Gurman suggested that we might see more Apple products in 2022 than any other year. What else do you think we'll see this year? Expecting Mac Pro, new colourful MacBooks Air, but what else might we see this year? I've got a good feeling this year that we are going to see new iPhones. We've already seen, obviously, the SE earlier this year, but I feel like iPhone 14 is probably on the way later this year. Obviously, we'll be getting our Apple Watches as usual. We'll be getting an update to the iPad. Hopefully, maybe we'll get the redesign this year to the original iPad, the base one. That would be really nice to have everything in line with the same design language, especially if the iPad Air is about to move up to a new kind of design, or at least a refreshed design with that MagSafe added. Obviously, more Macs. I would love to see a MacBook Nothing return. I think that would be just a really good move from Apple's side, and maybe a budget level for the Macs as well. I've said about Mac SE for years and years, and I'm hoping that this is the year that we actually see it. A MacBook and a Mac Mini in that SE lineup would be great. Tim Kinetics also asks, iCave answers, iPhone 14 spec leaks suggest that the iPhone 14 non-Pro models will look almost identical to the iPhone 13 models. Other than the unbinned A15 inside, what other software improvements might we see as upgrades? So yes, the design leaks that we've been seeing recently for the iPhone 14 do not look like the stuff that we had from John Prosser a little while ago, which is disappointing because I really liked them. I thought it looked really cool. However, it also seems like the sort of thing that someone could make like a backplate that sticks on with MagSafe and kind of get that look anyway. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Maybe we can look at making that as a product. But yeah, it does look like the iPhone 14 is going to look a lot like the iPhone 13, just with the front having that pill and hole cut out, which is apparently much better than having a notch. But yes, it looks like we might even get a bigger camera bump on the back this year rather than no camera bump at all, so that the 48 megapixel camera can fit inside. That's not what we were expecting. But in terms of software upgrades, I'm really hoping that cinematic video gets a bit better this year. Maybe allows us to do 4K, because I think it's still locked to 1080p right now. Maybe allows us to do 60 frames a second, because it's locked to 30 right now, I believe. Although I'm a poor person and only have an iPhone 12 Pro Max, not an iPhone 13, so I really have no idea about cinematic mode. Beyond that, could we see the satellite communications that were rumoured last year for the 13? That's a possibility. Could Apple go and actually just buy out one of these satellite companies? I mean, they've got the cash on hand if that's what they decide they want to do. That would be really good. NH asks, iCave answers, do you think M1 Pro Max Ultra devices will receive the same number of macOS updates? Or is there enough differences to garner an extra generation or two? I think it's going to be the same number of generations of updates, because remember, the cores themselves are the same. You've just got more of them. It's not a case of having different technology inside. In particular, it is more a case of you've just simply got more of that generation of cores. So I don't think we're going to get longer support on an M1 Studio than an M1 Mac Mini, to be completely honest. I think, in fact, the M1 Mac Mini that came out in 2020 will probably stop support at the same time as the M1 Ultra Studio, which means that the M1 Mac Mini, which is much, much cheaper, actually got longer support. John Malkin asks, iCave answers, could the Intel Mac Mini just be for the people that need to have Intel for dual boot and compatibility? I mean, they're keeping it around for some reason. I still hope that it's because there is a higher end version coming. I don't imagine that there's that many people out there that are buying them at this point for that, and surely those people, the handful that are, you know, that must have something to replace what they have right now, which I guess must be super old at this point if they need it, would be buying it used, I would guess, unless it's institutional. But then education and everything else is well supported by M1, so you would go that way. I don't know. There's got to be a reason, and I'm hoping we will see it by WWDC. James Apple, is it me, or didn't they just make Apple just filed as a gaming company recent as the M1 Pro and M1 Max for the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro? I'm not sure what you're asking me, James. Did Apple file as a gaming company? I don't think so, but if they did, feel free to shoot me a link over. You got my DMs. Evan Rogers, iCave Answers, how are things going? Things are good, man. It's just super busy at work. As you can see, we've redone a bit in here. Things have just been super crazy. I've posted up on the Patreon if you're over there. I think we might change from doing the kind of early and ad-free because people aren't that interested in it. Whether you're just there because you like supporting me or whether you actually want some different perks, we can arrange that. So let's have that conversation. Thank you so much for being here, guys, and I will see you in the next one.